Okay, I thought I'd take a minute to explain some of the things that are involved with reglassing the boat. There's certainly lots and lots of good information out there, particularly from the vendors themselves, West and whatnot, on how to use their materials. One of the things that I found extremely helpful was to set up a station for doing my mixing and whatnot. As you can see, there's the 105 resin, the 205 fast, and the 206 slow, and I use both quite a bit. And when I get out to the boat, I'll show where I use slow and the fast. The other thing that is relevant is, let's see if this will show up. This is my supply of fillers, more hardener, containers and whatnot. You're going to go through a lot of this stuff, and then down here more fillers. I've got some West System barrier coat that I'll use at the end. There's quite a bit of it, actually. I have almost a case of the stuff, because I never want to have this problem again. I bought some System 3, and price-wise, I'm not sure if it's really much difference. The big thing is that you're not going to use the pumps. You're going to go by ratios. It's a 2-to-1, which is easy enough to sort out, and it's just a matter of somewhere around here I was sorting out. I just have marked some plastic cups to show the ratio. Also have just used some inexpensive foam rollers. The trick with all of this epoxy stuff is it's a killer to clean your equipment back up afterwards. And so denatured alcohol is your friend. It's a really good solvent for epoxy, and you can use it on your skin without too big of an issue. Some of the other things that since I used to do remodeling of my own homes, I had a big supply of taping knives and whatnot for doing seams on wallboard and whatnot. And these big blades have come in really handy for doing fairing work. So I have a collection of those, and I have a huge collection of the squeegees. When you're using the roller, one of the things you need to remember is that you can reuse these, and you could try to clean them, but it's like, why? Just let the epoxy harden, and then just reuse it the next day. It's fine. You don't even have to break it out. You're going to need a supply of scissors. For sure, you always want to have safety glasses on. And I wear glasses, but I have to wear I still wear safety glasses over them, because the likelihood of getting epoxy on your head is very high. There have been days when I thought I was going to epoxy myself to the boat. But this big tray, again, from wallboard work, is really helpful for cleaning equipment up after you've gotten it all messed up when you're working. So I just keep some alcohol in there, and I can clean the tools and keep cleaning them as I'm using them, because after a while they get so slippery you can hardly hang on to them anymore. So the next thing that I wanted to show, and this is stuff I've got laid in for coming work, more rollers. I don't know if I'll use this or not, but I've just been buying the larger rollers and cutting them. It's easy enough to do. To do overhead glassing on the boat, some kind of table is necessary, because you have to pre-wet out your glass. And then what I do is roll it up onto a PVC pipe, and you can see these. And what I'll do with these, since these have been used and they get messed up after a while, I just take my sander and clean them back up again. And So I have some different lengths. These are 1.5 inch diameter tubes. 2 would be fine. 3/4 would be probably too small, and it makes it hard to roll it up. But you need some way to roll up the sheets of fiberglass when they're all wetted out to take out to the boat. The other thing that you're going to do is you're going to cover your table, and I'm using a heavy mill plastic. And then, like here, since this was used yesterday, you can see the bubbles that have been created from the epoxy as the fiberglass has been rolled up. So I'll have to replace this plastic before I use it again. And I'm a tool guy, and if tools help make your life doable, then get it. Standard grinder, you need that for doing your 12-to-1 grind backs. I tell you what, this little right angle grinder with both the Scotch-Brite pads and then 36 and coarser, that's a 2-inch pad on it. That thing is hugely helpful. This is my new best friend. I finally broke down and bought an inexpensive dual action sander, and this is just a Husky. And my deal with some tools is when I think it's not something I'll use all the time, I'll buy an inexpensive one, the first one, and then when I kill it, then I'll go back and buy a better quality one. But the board sander, that works really good too. And you know, it's not just the sander, but you got to have a full stable of the different grits of sanding paper for these things. You're going to be using a respirator. I've used the random orbital electric sander a lot. So some of the things you need to think through, I don't think I could handle multitasking doing this work while I'm also trying to videotape. So let's see if I can back up enough to show this. So this area here was where the boat sat on the cradle last summer. So that patch that you're seeing there is some of the most recent area that I've dried and then recovered. And you have to remember with new glass that you want to overlap a minimum of 2 inches of anything, and I generally go more than that if I can. And what I found is a 25-inch width is about as wide as I can manage. I've done wider, but I've also tried to glue myself to the boat with the stuff on my head. So one of the challenges that I have is I'm working with this trailer, and these bars are not helpful for getting easy access to the boat. So in the case of the cradles, I did work a thwartship, and so that meant I had to fight with these rails. And even once you're inside the rails, you're stepping over rails down on the bottom. So once I had the 2 layers of initial coating, then I started working lengthwise, and again working with about a 25-inch wide panel, and probably all of 40, 50 inches, whatever the width of the roll of fiberglass was, and working down the hull. And that's much easier than working across. And you have to remember these boats have a solid center section. So initially I was, again, getting my overlap to it, and I've actually covered it all the way over in a couple places. So most of this area has at least 2, and most of these areas in here are now at 4 and 5 layers of glass. I started with 29-ounce material, which was like fiberglassing with carpeting, crazy heavy. And one of the things that working with these stitched cloths is the thread. And what happens, and here's an example of, you know, when you start struggling and you're laying out, the squeegee will start pulling threads out. And I don't know if that shows up, but once those threads start coming out, bad things start happening. The cloth starts coming unglued, and you can start having more fun than you had in mind. So those are problems to be avoided. So again, what I've been doing is glassing in panels. Again, there's the rear cradle. So this section had, these might have been 20-inch and 18-inch wide. And so I'm going to be coming back in with, this is 20-ounce stitched cloth. And this section of the boat back here, none of this glass originally was more than 2 layers of chopped strand, and most of it was 1. So I'm putting in way more material than was there originally. So again, I'm keeping the higher strength towards the center line, and then outboard, this area will be getting covered with 10-ounce right up to the waterline. And there's already a 10-ounce cloth on here, so there'll be 2 layers out in these sections. So again, looking down the center line, again, probably 5 to 6 inches from dead center is solid glass on these boats. So core work really starts outboard of that. So another thing that I've done, this is a good example of it. Here I'm filling in where I had a low spot, and you can see I've actually glassed right over the through hull. And then I'll take that little right angle grinder and grind the glass out of here and leave the fiberglass over the through hull itself. But there's a low depression here because this whole area had a huge amount of resin around it, and this is right under the galley sink on my boat. So yeah, I've just glassed over through hulls and then gone back and ground them out. But I had a couple of spots that were low, so I went back in with additional layers to build up the to basically make it easier to fare. And that's the whole problem with this working on the external side of the boat, is you're going to have a fairing nightmare. But you know, as compared to it's not, in my mind, conceivably practical to be even considering the amount of work that I've done from working from the interior side of the boat. You might be able to do small sections, but in my boat, the area that was damaged or wet was much greater than you could have ever accessed practically from the inside. There's just too many things in the way. Engines, the tub itself, the inner tub, tanks that you'd be removing. It just, like I said, just would not be practical. So the way that this works, the thing that you have to sort out and practice to be able to do this overhead glassing, is the first thing I do is I use a chip brush or a roller, and you can see it here where it's kind of glossier. You first you wet that area out with where the area that you're going to put the new glass in. So that's got a slow set epoxy coating on it. And so I can coat a large area with a slow set, and then I'll use the fast setting material on the actual new glass. And then wet it out on the table, roll it up on the PVC, and then the fun begins. You start squeegeeing. You start with an edge and you very slowly roll it out, and if you had more hands, it would be massively easier. But I've done 98% of this work by myself, and you know, it's overhead work. This is not simple. It's tiring and a challenge, but it's doable. It can be done. Somewhere back here is the here's the through hole for the intake. Again, glassed right over it. Not concerned. You can see it, but it's right there. Again, just a matter of grinding the glass back. Now, the other thing you can see here, I'll back up a bit, is originally when I did most of the hull drying, I had a wood cradle built inside this trailer, and it was supporting the boat. And what I did is I deflated the tires, and that lowered the trailer and took all the load off these pads. Now what I'm doing, since I've gotten these areas strong enough, is I'm willing to take the center pads down, and I can raise those again once I'm done working in that section. And again, so there's additional support that I've got here, and I've also done the same up at the bow. And without the pads in there, I'm not climbing up inside the boat and bouncing around or do anything. And all of my stands have been marked for the correct position that they should go back to. So working with the trailer is got some advantages. It would be way easier to work with regular stands. One advantage I have is that this isn't a terrible height to be working at. If the boat was down lower on the ground, you'd be having both the fun of working overhead and being squat down. And for the most part, this is as a guess, the transition to the keel is probably 5.5 feet off the ground, so I'm not having to squat or anything. That would make it just that much more special. So anyway, this is not easy, but at this point in time, this boat reads as dry. There's a couple of weird little aberrations where it's showing as wet, but they're like 2-inch diameter spots. So I'm thinking over time those will dissipate, and the moisture will move from the wet spot to other areas. If you can see that, this is what I did an awful lot of, which is just replaced a small cube where the balsa had been damaged. Here's another one that's a little larger. It occurred to me that if I had to work in a boatyard, which I'm obviously not, I would have to have or make some kind of table, and I would have to have, you basically have to create your resin station, so you've got a place to mix and prepare your resins to come get ready for the glass work. So the other thing that you clearly would want, I've used a lot of pneumatic tools, and they are just crazy handy for this kind of work. And once I get to the final stage of this project, which is where I paint this boat, the pneumatic, well, the compressor will provide the air for the sprayer. So you can see how my quality staging area for material. I have to say that that stitched 20-ounce material up there on the top, that's massively easier to work with, and than the 29 ounce material that I used. And the challenge again with this stuff is the stitching. And I don't know if you can, if the camera will pick up some of that. But there's a stitch that holds this stuff together, and you have to be really careful when you're squeegeeing it out to not, and use a good squeegee that has no coarseness on it, because if your squeegee catches one of these threads and pulls it out, next thing you know, you have a thread hanging down and it's going to catch on your hat, and this is voice of experience, and the next thing you know, you could be pulling your whole sheet of cloth down on your head. Been there, done that, really don't want to do it again. Again, I don't know if it's real obvious, but this is a good weight to work with, and you can build up good section thickness with it. Down by the keel, you're trying to get to 1/4 of an inch, so you'll probably be looking at 6 layers of this stuff to get to that thickness. And that would be a manageable, easy to accomplish amount of cloth to put on. And the other material down on the end is 10 ounce cloth, and I've run out. One thing I was going to point out, the other thing that has been hugely helpful, and if I was working in the yard, I'd probably have to figure out how to duplicate this, and I'd probably want to make a stand, but this is the 20 ounce material, and I just have, let's see if I can show this, but this is just hanging overhead, so it's easy to pull down various widths and cut it. Again, like I said, if I had to work in a yard, I'd have to create some kind of a stand to hold the material. For all the work that you're going to be doing, you got to have the material on rolls. It's just not practical to have it folded. I mean, I can't imagine how that would be very workable. It's crazy hard to estimate. I haven't really tried. As soon as I run out, I buy more, and I've used quite a bit of this stuff. Another really simple tool that I made was just what plasterboard guys would call, or bricklayers would call, a hock. This was just a 1/4 inch piece of plywood that had a glossy surface on it, and I just added a 1-inch dowel and glued and screwed it to the sheet. And this is perfect for after you've mixed up your filler, you just dump it on there, and then you can use your knives to scoop off however much you're trying to use, and apply it to the core. I should have pointed out when the video camera was looking at this area of fiberglass here that this is an area where the edges were fraying after I was squeegeeing it out. And what I've learned is when it starts getting like this, it's time to quit. And the way that I'll fix this is I'll just use the 36-inch or 36 grit sander, and I'll just grind this all out. And that's typically what I end up doing with all of the edges of where this glass ends. Is I'll just feather that back and take out any of the imperfections that occur. Again, what you're seeing is the glass, the stitching has come out, and the edges are starting to fray. And if you start fooling with this too much, trying to get it to lay down, the only thing that happens is it just frays more and more. So if the piece of cloth will stay put, quit. And like I said, you're just going to grind this out after the fact, after it's cured. The reason this particular bit got funky was I was trying to be fancy, and I had cut this
panel to fit around both sides of the tail end of the keel, and that just did not work well. Maybe you could have worked it out if you'd had more hands available, but working by myself, it just caused big trouble. Several of these areas that you're seeing in this video and these stills are areas that I just glassed yesterday and have not had any sanding done to them at this point in time. And other areas where it looks whiter, those are areas that have been sanded, are ready for additional layers of glass. So it, depending on what you're seeing, it's a little bit hard to understand necessarily where I am in each particular section. So the next steps for me are to finish adding the glass up to the thicknesses that I'm shooting for, and then the really big project starts, and that is the fairing of all this glass work and all the lap joints and whatnot. All that has to be faired out by adding additional filler and board sanding and on and on. And my decision at this point in time is I'm going to go for good. It's not going to be perfect. You would need 3 guys and a 4-foot long board to work through all the sanding that this hull is going to require to be perfect, and I'm just not going to do that. It's going to be good, but it's not going to be perfect.